All right. It's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast in Philadelphia. So we will kick things off. We will be joined hopefully momentarily by our fourth panelist, Mike McShane, who is calling in from Ireland. So we are troubleshooting that on the back end, but we will get started with our three panelists and Linda Jacobson, who is our moderator. Let me first just introduce myself by saying my name is Brendan Lowe. I'm with VELA Education Fund, one of the two organizations putting this event on today, and we are thrilled to have you with us for this conversation about traditional classroom teachers transitioning to launch a micro school or a non-traditional education environment of their own. We will have Linda Jacobson, who is a senior writer at the 74 National Education News site, posing the questions to our panelists to kick things off. And we will also be taking questions from the chat. So right now, we encourage you to share where you're calling in from. And then I'll be checking out the chat while Linda's posing the questions, and we'll take questions from the audience as well. If you know somebody who's not able to make it today, we are recording this. We will post it both on the 74's website and on VELA's website. We are also streaming to Facebook. So hello to everybody who is joining Facebook through the 74's page. And with that, I will send it over to Linda.
Great, thanks, Brendan. My name is Linda Jacobson. I write for the 74. I just recently ran a story this week about teachers who have left during the pandemic to open a school or join a new traditional model. And I think over the past 2 years, we've learned that there are often complex reasons why families leave their district schools, and the same is true for educators. There's often not one reason why they were looking for something new. I wanted to start off with you, Heather. If you could introduce yourself first, and then also talk about what pushed you to leave your district job as a counselor, and why did you want to open a microschool?
Great. So I'm Heather Long. I live in northern New Hampshire and right along the border of Vermont, though. So I had been in public schools for about 15 years, working as a school counselor or related positions in both Vermont and New Hampshire. I was kind of pretty set on my career working in public schools and hadn't really thought outside the box or thought I would do anything different. And then the pandemic came along, and like many of us, my whole world was tipped upside down. I have two little boys of my own. One of them is now 10 and one is now 6. And when we were heading back to school for the 2020-2021 school year, I decided that I didn't really want to send them. I was worried about, the restrictions. I was worried about the anxiety. I didn't want their school experience to be changed by that, or for them to lose, their love for learning that they still had and that curiosity for learning. And I was worried, I didn't know how school would look. So at that time, I grouped together with a group of parents and we formed a homeschool co-op. We were using a virtual program to do like the core academic subjects. And we had a group of parents that would contribute some time and just teach subjects that they loved or that they felt like they were comfortable teaching. None of our parents were teachers. I was the only one in the education field. And that experience really opened my eyes. The kids did great. There were some tricky parts. The pandemic allowed us to have the flexibility to do it. And the work schedules, that we could do that. I was still working in the public school system, but luckily I was able to shift my schedule a little bit to spend some time with the kids. And my oldest son especially thrived. He was in 3rd grade at the time, loves technology, did great with learning on his own pace, learning with technology, absolutely amazed me with the level of independence he was able to take. I never really thought a 3rd grader could do that until I saw it. And, my son was never the most organized kid, but he liked to learn. He was excited to learn and did really, really well. so that kind of got me started thinking about, wow, education could look a little different. But coming into the 2021-22 school year, I was still working in my position in the public school, and we decided as a family to send them back, just because the logistics were going to be really hard to continue to do a homeschool co-op like we were. And so we all kind of went back into our regular schedules in the public schools and just weren't quite happy, and we weren't quite thriving the way we wanted to. And that goes both for me and my position and for my children. I really didn't see that excitement for learning that I had seen previously for them in the year before. And for me, I just started to struggle with some of the challenges I was facing and not being able to teach in the way I really wanted to. I saw a huge increase in needs for children coming out of the pandemic, and just felt frustrated, and kind of the traditional ways I knew to meet those needs just didn't seem to be working as well as I wanted. Within this time, I had started to talk with Prenda, which is a group that supports open and your own micro school. And New Hampshire has adopted Prenda. So I had started conversations with them and really fell in love with the Prenda model. They allowed me the support that I needed to make that jump from the public school system and open up in my own micro school. So with the support of Prenda and my family, in early December, I decided that I was going to leave my position and open my own micro school with I had started with 4 or 5 kids at first and got up to 6 by the end of the year. Growing for next year, I'm going to partner with another teacher and we'll have 14 students. So it's been really amazing just to watch the kids grow, to watch that process, to watch my family grow and really thrive when we made the switch away from public school.
And do we have Mike?
Nope, but we're still joining. He's still working on it.
Okay. All right. Well, Ian, I'm going to throw this question to you a little bit. I mean, because you kind of seen the education field from a bigger perspective. Can you talk a little bit about what distinguishes a pod from a micro school?
Sure. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
And introduce yourself first. Sorry.
Yeah. Can I take 2 minutes on introducing?
Yes, please,
Yeah,
please.
totally. Happy to. So yeah, I'm Ian. I kind of similar to Heather. I spent the last 15 years working in the public school system, mostly in charter schools, and had the opportunity to work with some of the smartest people that I know today, and like the most committed educators in some of what I consider to be like some of the best charter schools in around the New York City area, which of course is like the most highly funded region, one of the most highly funded regions of our country. And even with all of those advantages, I look back on the experience that we were able to give kids, and it feels, again, like amazing people, but it feels still like mediocre for the vast majority of students because of, to me, this like one size fits all classroom problem. And even like, and certainly in my own classrooms, I would say that, and I wouldn't, even my own girls who have two young ones who I'm really thinking about what their future looks like, and I wouldn't put them in my classrooms in those spaces. And that to me started, like, I had a big problem with that idea and realization. And so I started exploring a couple of years ago in 2016 and started talking with educators. And what I started finding, and particularly when the pandemic hit, was that educators are like looking to transition or exploring other things. But then when you dig down deep, most educators are not leaving because they don't want to teach anymore. They're leaving because they do want to teach, and the systems that are there aren't allowing them to teach in a way that's both impactful and sustainable. And so that's what we wanted to build. And so I'm the lead at Primer Microschools, and we are supporting teachers in launching microschools in South Florida right now. We're supporting 5 teachers in launching those microschools across the city for the upcoming school year. So that's what I am working on, and happy to talk more about that. In terms of your question about pods and microschools, I found that people use them interchangeably, especially during the pandemic, right? Like pandemic pods, microschools, Prenda and, a couple other providers have been doing microschools since 2014. And so they've been around since pre-pandemic. But now I think what I'm seeing is that pods are typically thought of as more flexible and have less structured curriculum typically than a standard microschool. Microschool is like, yes, I'm definitely interested in kind of like a full day or at least half day consistent program for my kid. Pods seem to be more like, hey, let's group together. Typically like started by families versus through educational providers. Pods are, I would say. So that's my best answer to that question.
Great. Iman, if you could introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about Kind Academy and what you think families are looking for when they're seeking you out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. So my name is Iman. All my students call me Miss Iman. So that's what I'm used to hearing. I have a pretty long education background. In about 2013, I finished with my master's in school counseling, actually. And I went into schools. I actually interned at a charter, and I was like, yay, I get to counsel all these students. And I was really excited about being able to help change lives and help teach social emotional learning. And when I got in, they were like, you're really a testing coordinator, count these tests and make sure that all the kids get them. And that was my job at that point. And I was really frustrated with that. I could probably see students about 30 minutes a week if I was lucky. And that's not what I had gone to school for. So I was sad about that. But kind of started seeing a lot of students with special needs who needed accommodations on tests. And that made me excited about what can happen when we do give students exactly what they need to thrive. Because some students we'll read the test out loud to you. You can have extra time on this test. And that was awesome to me. And I thought that everybody should have this opportunity if it helped them to show that they could succeed. So I got certified in special education, had my own kids, and wanted them to kind of have these opportunities of flexible scheduling, unique and individualized programming that I had given to students with special needs. But I knew that they wouldn't get that in the schools if they didn't have a diagnosis. And I wanted them to at least be able to have this flexibility. So I left school, and parents started asking me to start teaching their learners too. So in about 2016, we started with our first nature school, where we were all outside and the kids would get together. We would do sensory play, literacy building, nature and art, and all this kind of really cool stuff together. And it was kind of at that point, probably like a pod or a co-op, I guess is probably what would really be what it's called. That grew a lot, and we started servicing a lot of families. 2020 hit, of course, pandemic. And then we started taking our nature classes and basically boxing up everything and shipping them out. First it was South Florida, and then people all over the country started asking for our sensory kits, and they had a lot of academics in them too. We went virtual, we started doing our classes virtually, and that's how we became a global school. And now this year, we are launching our first brick and mortar. We're gonna have a building, which we don't plan on being in much, but it's nice to have. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think families seek us out because probably the top 3 reasons that I think families seek us out is because the alternative learning model in itself. I think some kids do great in traditional models, but there are some who just don't. And I think there are families who recognize that and really just want something different. I think diversity is a huge part of what we do. We're very, very clear about what is important to us, and we value diversity. And we talk about that all the time in our program. And that's not something that we see a lot in some of the homeschool communities, and families who do want to have diversity. A lot of times they will join us for that. And the social and emotional. We're really big on talking about kindness and correcting our learners to make sure that we're treating each other with kindness, and treating the earth with kindness and things like that. So that's kind of, I think, why families seek us out. Thank you, Linda.
Sure. Heather, can you talk a little bit about a project or lesson that you might do now, and how that's different than what you would have been able to do in your district role? What kind of freedom do you have?
Absolutely. That might be hard to narrow down to one, but, and I would say it's a little bit less of lessons than experiences. Kind of one big thing for me is we were able to ski and go indoor climbing with our students. And that's something that a lot of the schools locally are able to do, but kind of on a shorter term. We did it regularly throughout the year. And for me, with the social emotional piece, I think there's so much value in doing that through adventure. So as a school counselor, I would try to incorporate that adventure piece into my work at the school, but there were just so many things that got in the way of us doing it regularly, from logistical things that we had to, get the permission trip forms signed and approval to use property, and the cost that with the help of the VELA grant and strong support, I was really able to get my kids out a lot and really saw huge improvements in confidence and growth mindset. But more specifically for a lesson, there was this really cool moment where I was teaching the kids about habitat. And, I had kind of my idea of a lesson planned, and it turned into a conversation about if we were to make up our own animal, what would it be? And we talked about the animal and what it needed to survive and where it would live, and came up with a name. We called it a zubida. That was super fun for the kids. And I was able to say, okay, let's scratch everything for the rest of the day. Let's go outside, let's go into the woods. And we built habitats for our zubida families. And that turned into write-in projects. And, now I have a zubida community in my yard. I think we even have an Ace Hardware for zubidas. So just that flexibility to just go with the kids and where they are in that moment. I feel like if I plan something for them, I could plan the most amazing lesson, but it's not as engaging if it just comes up. It's not as engaging if it's their own. And we have that freedom to just say, okay, yeah, we're going outside and we're going to do that now.
Ian, can you talk a little bit about what you see as this as a career choice? What is sort of the future of microschools, and what do teachers or educators from other roles kind of need to have in place to make this leap?
Yeah, I think about this also in the context of kind of future of work and where a lot of our society is going. And to me, that includes things like people want more flexibility, people want definitely sustainable lives, but also a little bit of ownership. And there's like an entrepreneurial vibe that I think a lot of teachers are really interested in. And so as I think about what that looks like, it looks like, how do we make opening one of these innovative programs and like actually having autonomy over that program in the ways that you've heard like our panelists talk about today, like how do we make that doable and sustainable? And so, and when I think about the ownership component, I think specifically, and this is controversial, but I'll just share it with you all. Like I think about people are building amazing companies and they have equity in those companies and they have as a stake in ownership, right? That they are like able to take and keep with them. I do not come from a business background, and so all this is fairly new to me. But I looked back after 15 years of working in charter schools, and I created all these things and worked my butt off for 15 years. And then I looked around, I was like, oh, I actually don't own anything. In fact, everything I created like is owned by somebody else legally. And so I think that's another component of it that is interesting to some teachers at least. Yeah, so I think it's like, how do we provide a space where like autonomy can happen? I think about like, there's a lot of families who really love their teachers, but have trouble with certain elements of the structure of the school. And there's a lot of teachers who really just want time with their kids. And then there's a whole lot that's in between them from making that happen. And so how do we make it so that teachers that are loved by kids and families can just connect as directly as possible to do these innovative experiences, and like make it financially, sustainable and doable for the teacher? I think that's a really challenging thing right now. Like I see microschool founders, like finances are hard, lots of legal stuff involved. So there's like this whole operational realm, and then instruction is hard. Like anyone I know who's opened a microschool, including the people on this call, are like amazing, like on the next level. But like to teach multiple different subjects or do that interdisciplinary thing they're trying to do, like how can we provide the right supports and options for a little bit at least of instructional support in addition to that operational support? Did I answer your question, Linda?
Yeah, no, that's great. I was thinking, more in terms of, you mentioned sustainability.
Yeah, people want lives that are sustainable. They want some say over what they're doing, and the traditional schools are not allowing people to have that. I'm coming from Miami-Dade, and I think I don't know if I should say that, but like they and some districts are like more notorious than others for really not giving much opportunity for teachers to change anything. It's kind of like, well, are you on this point at this lesson of this day? And we'll come in your room and make sure that you are. And like, nobody thinks that's good for kids or families or teachers. So yeah.
Well, I think a related question too, Iman talked about diversity, and obviously early on there were a lot of concerns, and I don't think they've gone away, about pods and microschools just creating more inequity in education and stealing away families from the public system. And I'm curious how, Primer's thinking about that in terms of which teachers are seeking out to create microschools, which families are they trying to reach? How are you addressing those issues in terms of diversity and equity?
Yeah, no, it's critical. Like in my mind, if you're building something that is not diverse or increasingly equitable, then what are we doing? And the argument that I make, especially moving down to Miami after being in New York for so many years, is like, part of the argument I make is like, there's no like funding that is equitable across. I mean, like there's a lot of inequity in funding just across certain states and things like that, at the system level. And so the way that we're able to make it equitable and bring in all families who are accepted is through using vouchers and education savings accounts that are available in Florida. Those are obviously not available everywhere, but they're critical for being able to do this in a way that is equitable. The question about like, who is this for? And I think about this, to me, this feels right. Coming from like an entire public school background, as many of us do, right? Where we grew up thinking like public schools are the just and the good and the moral. And sorry, I'm not like, this is just kind of like one train of thought. Sorry if you came from a private school background. I also love you. I did not. But now I'm like looking back, and I think that what I learned was actually not necessarily true. And especially moving forward from where we are now, as long as we can make it equitable. And what I mean by saying that is like the whole charter school movement that I've been kind of a part of for the last 15 years, all of that was about choice. It was about providing families and kids with choice for what's best for their kids. This right now, the topic that we're all discussing right now, feels to me like the next stage of choice. Okay, we provided one layer of choice. How can we provide even more choices for those families and those kids to have those options?
Right. Heather, or actually Heather and Iman, if both of you can talk about this, have you had any families yet where this model was not a good fit, either for the educator or for the family? And how do you kind of confront those types of situations? Because it's, I'm sure, not always an easy transition.
That's a great question. I have one particular student that I think that is true for, and he's a great student, but needs more structure than I'm able to offer in my microschool, and maybe some more support than I'm able to offer. And all along, I've just been having conversations with parents. So that's one thing I've really valued. And another reason why I wanted to do a microschool, because I feel like that parent-teacher relationship is so important. And I wanted to have more time and availability to really focus on that, and for parents to know a lot about where their child is at and what they're learning, and to have a say in their education. So I think all along we've been having those conversations, so that at this point, where we're looking to next year, it's really easy to have the conversation of like, okay, maybe this isn't the right fit. Let's explore some other options, and with no harsh feelings on either side.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you brought that up, or was it just an ongoing, did the family sense that as well?
Yeah, I think the family sensed that. So it's been an ongoing conversation, when there are moments when this child has struggled, we've been having those conversations. So it's not like it came as a surprise of like, oh, I thought my child was fine. But, those regular conversations of like, hey, I noticed that this was difficult, or, these are the things that he needs that I might not be able to offer right now. So just lots of open conversations have really helped with that.
Linda, I don't mean to interject, but our webinar has jumped the pond, as they say, and gone international. Mike McShane, ladies and gentlemen, calling in from Ireland. So Linda, Mike is here as well.
Great, great. Well, Mike, if you want to weigh in a little bit on the broader future, for micro schools and what you see in terms of this being a career future, for educators who are frustrated in their traditional roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I apologize if I'm going to repeat things. I'm just glad the amount of profanity that I have shouted at this box in the last like 15 minutes as we've tried to get all of this sorted. So I'm glad that didn't come through. So I promise I'll keep it PG on this.
And give a little background about yourself as well. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. Mine's Mike McShane. I'm Director of National Research at EdChoice. I do a lot of research on alternative kind of educational models, innovation in education. So things like microschools, pandemic pods, hybrid homeschooling, the lot of it. And I think that, and forgive me if I'm repeating things that have already been said that maybe you heard the shouting all the way in America that I was doing, but I think that we're seeing a lot of stuff. We do a lot of public opinion polling here at EdChoice, including a quarterly poll of teachers. And I think we are seeing teachers who want things like a more flexible schedule. We see teachers who want, I think, to have kind of stronger connections with parents where people feel like they're rowing the boat in the same direction. I'm seeing some nodding here, which makes me, it's always good when you're the researcher and you just sort of count the things and then it actually lines up with people's actual experience. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that sort of stuff, I mean, we're seeing in our polling anywhere from like 30 to 40% of teachers saying if they had the choice that they would want to go to some kind of part-time at home, part-time at school schedule, which actually interestingly lines up when we poll parents and when we poll students. The same kind of proportions of folks want these things. So I think we have to focus on like what problems are we trying to solve? And I think that a lot of the conversation around these schools has been the problems that parents have, the problems that children have, the way that they solve them. But there are lots of problems that teachers have that these schools can solve as well. So finding that kind of fit of like what problems teachers have and the structure and function of schools and how they fix them is, I think, an incredible opportunity.
What are I know there's examples of districts actually running micro schools and that it's not always a completely independent type of model. Can you talk about how widespread that is? And is there more, do you see more districts eventually trying to work, with this model as well?
I think they would be crazy not to. I know that there has been some partnership that's taken place thus far. There's also been some pushback when folks have come and tried to do those things. I don't really know how widespread it is right now, but I think that, like I said, I think that they'd be nuts not to. This is something that parents are clearly interested in. I think there are lots of interesting models that are, that could be done sort of like what groups like Prenda and others are doing, where they're working under the auspices of a charter school, depending on how they're structured in various states. Like districts could do the same thing, right? Where they could say, hey, listen, these are students they sort of count towards the district or others, but we're going to use these smaller learning environments. We're going to partner with a Prenda or a Pods or a schoolhouse or any of these sort of groups to match teachers and work with various curricula that are available. So no, I think that parents are clearly crying out for this. I think a lot of teachers would be interested in this. And so it's in district's best interest to try and pursue something like this.
Ian, can you talk a little bit more about the educators that are interested in opening micro schools, and what do you see in common there?
I think that's actually what makes this so exciting. Is I can tell you about the educators we're most focused on, and I will, but what's exciting is the diversity of people who are coming and interested in opening something, right? Because there could be a family out there who's looking for that exact thing. So I don't know that there's any one thing. And I think this also plays into some of the other questions that have come up, including like the financial sustainability question that we'll get to in a minute, I think. But what we are looking for specifically is we're looking for in-person teachers who are really strong with building relationships with families and have like deep ties in their communities, no matter what community they come from. And then we're looking for virtual educators, and this ties into the pedagogy question, that are really excellent instructors in either a project-based learning model or a straight up like Common Core, mastery-based, high rigor, high quality instructional materials curriculum. That's kind of our blended, our hybrid model. But again, like, this is the beauty of it, is like educators, whatever they're passionate about, there's probably kids and families who would love to be, with that model.
Are they more, do they tend to be more elementary level, middle level? I mean,
we piloted across third grade up through high school. And we had kids and families from all those, and we had teachers who are coming from all those backgrounds. So I think the easier way to look at it is like school experience, maybe one, and maybe pay also is a big factor. Just to be like straight up, like you're probably going to find more teachers who are equally as exhausted as the teachers in New York, but making significantly less, and who are, therefore like, oh, I'm interested in doing something that's slightly different.
Yeah.
Linda, if it's okay, Ian, I'm going to use his segue to jump into the questions we're getting through the chat and through
Great.
Facebook. So I'll pose a few here. The first one is intended for Iman, and anybody else can jump in, about building on your comments about diverse enrollment, and wondering if you market specifically for this. Is it a result of word of mouth? Can you share a little bit more, maybe some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent question, and super important. I think we did two things. I think it was a bit of a combination. Our leadership was very diverse. I obviously started it, and that alone was like a big deal. Seeing somebody who looked like them made them feel automatically more comfortable. In a lot of our schools, we had a very diverse student body, but not a very diverse leadership. And that throws a lot of people off and makes them feel like, maybe. So I think that people really like that. And then we're very, very clear. I think we put on our website, like, this is our statement. So families know immediately, like, this is who we are, this is what we do. You can totally join us if you want, but like, these are the things we don't accept here either. We include everybody. And if that's not comfortable for you, then this probably isn't the right fit. And I think you just have to be very, very clear if that's what you're looking for. In marketing, of course, in our pictures, the students are diverse, so therefore people feel more comfortable. So I think that that's a big part of it too. Socioeconomically, we try to make sure that we accept, we offer VELA actually like gave us like a scholarship, and we're like really big on targeting people who can't necessarily afford our programs. But we've always done that, whether it was out of our own financial like resources. We have family volunteers, so we could kind of co-op things, and they would teach, and then their learners can come. So that helped keeping us socioeconomically diverse as well. So, yep.
There are a bunch of questions around how you collectively make this work financially. So I want to ask about a few different aspects. One is about financial sustainability. So is there a certain number of students or student to teacher ratio to make a school viable? So I'll put that into the ether. Then there's a question about opening a tuition-free micro school. And kind of the feasibility, especially at this time, to do that. And then there's also a question around facilities and startup costs and cracking that nut. Iman it feels like we're touching a nerve there. So any and all of those topics, there's a lot of audience interest there.
I'll start by saying it's very complicated. It's more complicated than you'd expect as you dig into it. All of the statutes, like we have land use attorneys that we're talking with, and zoning codes, and this is just for one specific state and maybe a specific city within a state. And so there can be a whole lot to explore. and obviously all of us are down to do that. In terms of like, it's hard to answer the question about making it financially sustainable in general, because there's so many different factors here. Like, how nice do you want the facilities? What city are you building these facilities in? Are you using guides? Like, I think more of what a Prenda model would be. Heather, tell me if I got that wrong. Are you paying them above teacher salaries and making it competitive for teachers? Those are kind of two different ways to think about it. Like, what are the expenses for curricula? All those are factors, but I would say but if I had to be pushed for like what the number is, I think it's like at least 7,000 at a minimum, and probably closer to 10, depending on how you're doing all those things. Don't quote me on that, because that's like, there's just so many factors to take into account, but I want to give people something to work with in case that's helpful. Student to teacher ratio, like saying, like, you can go in different ways. We're doing a virtual component, which helps to make some aspects of it less expensive and give kids access to teachers across the country. So that's my start. Iman, please jump in.
Yeah, I'm in the same area as Ian, so we're both like struggling with a lot of the similar things. I think there are different places, like you can like start out of your house and it's no problem. And South Florida is like, no, you cannot start out of your house. Like, that's not going to work. But technically there are ways to do it. Like I said, we had a nature school. We had no overhead for a while, or if we did, it was it was just a permit, So there are ways to do it where you're not spending a lot of money up front. You technically can do it with kind of $0. How much money will you spend? A lot. My first few years, I spent a lot of money. That really was where the entrepreneurship idea comes in. I started taking business classes. How do I set these business goals? And you can do it. It just really does take that kind of stepping away from only being an educator and really learning what it takes to build a viable business. And you really, truly can. It might take some time, just like any other business. I think the break even is like 2 years or so. And you can do it that way. Just pay attention to what it says. And I think you can do it. Yeah.
I think for me, it looks much different. I am very lucky that I can do it out of my home. So I've gone that route. I think if I were to look at, I have a dream of, I'd love to have a little schoolhouse in the woods, but that jump, would be hard. I think it would really be hard to find the funding for that. But I kind of started with zero and work out of my home. And I've been really lucky with the support of Prenda. Prenda is paid for my family, as they pay the tuition through the state of New Hampshire because they've partnered. So it's through a grant. So those sort of things have really helped me get started. But I don't look at this as anything like I'm out for any financial gain. I look at it more of the mindset of I'm homeschooling my kids and I'm also able to take on additional kids with them. So I kind of have a different mindset of how I look at it.
I just wanted to throw one question in there. Can you talk a little bit, Heather, about what distinguishes a guide from a regular classroom teacher? And I'm also wondering, to what extent do families have a say in what you're teaching? I mean, obviously there's been a lot of attention to parents' interests in curriculum and being opposed or in favor of different things. I'm wondering how they factor into your lesson planning.
Absolutely. So to start with the difference between guides, guides do not necessarily have to be certified teachers. So for Prenda, we use online learning tools for our core ELA and math curriculums. So students can choose, or families can choose between programs like Lexia and Zern and Khan Academy for those core academic subjects. So I'm really there as a guide to help them guide them through their work and facilitate their learning process. However, there are teachers of record that Prenda hires. So those are our certified teachers that, are always working on the curriculum, or that guides can reach out to for support if there's more support needed for students. And as far as the flexibility with the curriculum, again, I know I mentioned it was really important for me to partner with parents. And, I've been very upfront with parents of like, these are my values. This is where I'm coming from and what I'm looking to teach these students, and making sure that they are on the same board, are on the same page with me. with how I'm educating their students and what curriculum I might choose to use or the different projects that we have.
Iman, do you want to address that as well as far as parents' role?
Sure. Yeah. Parents are a huge part of what we do and how much input and impact they have. They send me ideas all the time. Like we talk about passion-based learning a lot in our program. And I like to meet with parents and like say, hey, what's your learner into? So I can help them design like little projects around that. And that's a lot of fun. Like I love hearing about what the students are interested in.
Can you give an example?
I want to say coding was a big one. We had a student who was really involved and really just loved robotics. I don't know anything about robotics, so I kind of connected this family with learning. And the family was like, we've had this kit since Christmas 2 years ago, and he wants to learn it, but he just hasn't had a chance. So I connected him with a class that would help him to learn it. And by the end of 8 weeks, he had this, this content about something that he didn't before. So that's one of our favorite.
Great. Yeah, that's a great example.
Thank you.
And on the financial front, I wanted to ask Mike, as he looks out on the policy landscape, if he sees states making it easier or harder for teachers to do that as they take on startup costs or as they make facilities available. Are you seeing any action in that arena?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the whole kind of suite of school choice policies that exist out there, right? So chartering that allows for the flexibility to allow this to happen, the whole suite of sort of private school choice programs, education savings accounts and others, virtual learning that's worked with those. So states are definitely trying to make that, I mean, that depending on what perspective you're looking at, sort of from parents making it easier to enroll now. I will say though, on the teaching front, especially if we're thinking about traditional public school teachers transitioning into this, teaching is a kind of sticky occupation because of things like pensions and others. States and districts have put up a lot of borders that make it very difficult for teachers to move. So I think also there has been some efforts in states to try and make teacher benefits, salaries, et cetera, more portable. But I think that's going to play into this. As well. It's a lot of those things. Teachers are waiting to vest in their pensions, or they have a few more years, and where the wealth is accumulating. In that, it's some of those things that are not necessarily the top line numbers, like teacher salaries, or even things like certification and others. But those things that can oftentimes keep teachers in traditional public schools for quite reasonable reasons, right? Hey, I have 5 more years, or my pension just vested, or I have 5 more years, so I kind of hit the peak of pension wealth and stuff. So I think that's the kind of next round of conversations that we want to have, and think about some of those second order questions that sort of prevent people from moving, keep people where they are.
And Linda, I'll pose one more and then give it back.
That's fine. Thanks.
A question around how you measure student success. So we've talked about these kind of different learning environments and skiing and nature-based schools. And we haven't heard a lot about standardized tests or kind of traditional forms of assessment. So there was a question about can you explain how you measure student success in relation to learning outcomes?
I can start with what we're doing. So we are explicitly not excited about lots of test prep. That is not what our programs are geared towards. And that appeals to a lot of families that are at least interested in us, of course. We are using MAP at least probably like on a twice a year basis. So norm referenced exam, just to like families want to know that their kids know how to read and know math on grade level. And that as a parent, like that's very important to me as well. But then I think there's also things that are like, and then like we believe in a kind of mastery-based grading model, but then there are things that are harder to measure. And I think part of what all of us are probably excited about is creating more opportunity for that side of the curriculum. I think of like curriculum, my simple diagram is a spectrum between student-driven curricula and standard-driven curricula, and that we live way too far over on the standard-driven curricula side generally. And that would be better is at a minimum hitting multiple points on that spectrum throughout the day. That's my entire philosophy. So that's what we're working to do.
We do something very similar. We actually use something called Exact Path, which I love It actually coincides with MAP as well, for progress-based learning. And we've seen some immense growth, and the learners have just kind of taken and been doing their work. We've never like studied for the test. It was just like what they've done throughout the year. And the growth has been amazing regarding like the norm reference test. But we also look at social skills. This learner came in not really being able to carry a conversation on, and now they're, you know, like able to talk to anyone. They're able to do public speaking. They're able to really, you know, they've come out of their shell in a lot of ways. So we kind of measure that with qualitative assessments, observations, and document that type of stuff as well. So those are things that we use for assessments.
Yeah, I would add that for me, it's very similar. We use an iReady assessment several times a year to measure growth. And it's great, again, to see that progress that the students are made. And also, you know, that social emotional growth is huge. And so much of that is just observation, watching the kids and see the confidence they've gained and the skills they've gained in their interactions with each other.
And I will say, I think this is going to be an interesting issue moving forward, because I think, Ian, your observation that folks are not super into test prep or those, I think that is something that is shared with inside, outside of sort of innovative school models. And others. But so I actually wrote my Forbes column today sort of about this question of, in sort of innovative schools, how do we measure what students are doing, and how do we give students the opportunity to sort of say to the world, I learned what I was supposed to learn here. Because if you hear, hey, I went to like school in a forest or whatever, which by the way sounds totally awesome, but is like, well, how do I know that you learned what you were supposed to learn? And I won't belabor the whole column, but I sort of offered a couple different ways forward. But I think in some ways I said, you know, you can kind of go narrow or you can go broad. And so narrow, if you think of like the whole kind of badge and micro-credential system, right? Where you have Khan Academy or coding things, whatever, right? Where you can accumulate all these badges and you have your sort of, I don't know, your digital sash or whatever it is that you can say, hey, I learned all these little things and whatever. Rad, has its pluses and minuses that we could probably talk through. But then there's also a flip side where instead of going really micro, you could go broad and say, hey, look, we're going to try and create kind of end of high school exams, end of middle school. So rather than doing this that we're doing 4 times a year or even once a year, we say, hey, look, at like the end of elementary school, we have a test that's sort of aligned to things that we think folks are supposed to know and aligned to our pedagogy and others. I give the example of like the classical learning test, which classical educators have kind of gotten into. They created a new high school exit exam, which is kind of impressive, but things along those lines. So rather than saying we're going to test every little thing, we say, hey, at key stages, we're going to demonstrate the kids can take it to high school or to college, or others that say that they have it. But so I think you have both of those options. You could go narrow or you could go broad, but lots of opportunities out there to think about this stuff.
So Mike, I had another question for you. You know, both Florida and New Hampshire obviously support choice and have made it, you know, I don't want to say necessarily easy, but easier maybe than other states to branch out and create these kind of models. But what do you see more broadly on a state policy level that either will support this trend or make it harder for teachers in other states to open microschools?
I mean, I would say broadly, the trend is towards making this easier. I mean, in 2021, we saw more school choice, more and more extensive school choice bills passed than at any other point in recent history. 2022, the legislative sessions are just wrapping up now. It's an election year, so stuff tends to not happen as much then. So it'll be interesting after a round of elections, you know, what next year's legislative sessions look like. But I think that has been the trend across the country. We saw states like West Virginia pass an absolutely massive education savings account bill. Almost every student in the state is eligible for it. You saw Indiana make big expansions to the stuff that they're doing. I mean, even I think yesterday, Illinois signed an expansion to some of the school choice bills that it has. So it's not entirely just like a red state thing or whatever, but I think that's definitely the trend that we're seeing across the country, more and more expansive uses of funds.
Do you see any legislation or regulations specifically focusing on microschools as far as, you know, it has to be in a building or you have to have, you know, this many students, or, you know, anything down to that level?
Some states passed laws specifically about microschools. A lot of it was kind of during the pandemic. Louisiana, I'm thinking of some off the top of my head that did this. I know there were a few states that did it, that tried to set some regulations around it. And it sort of came up that the questions you were asking was, so what like are these things? Because, you know, states have regulations for childcare facilities, they have regulations for schools, they have regulations for like tutoring centers. And it's like, which one of these things is it? And I think different states came down in different places, and different educational entrepreneurs came down in different places. So, you know, depending on what state you're in, some folks might say, oh yeah, we're a school, or other states would say, oh, students are technically homeschooled, but this is an enrichment center, or this is a childcare facility, based on what those particular regulations are, and how onerous they are, and how that sort of connects to the work that they're trying to do. But there was some legislation designed to sort of protect these sorts of programs. But it's kind of weird, because in some ways it was like putting the cart before the horse, that some of the states like didn't have a lot of micro schools, and then they like created a thing to protect, and it'll be like protecting like a bald eagle in a state that doesn't have bald eagles. You're like, well, that's kind of weird that you said that ahead of time. I wonder if a bald eagle is going to show up. So in some ways it would almost make sense to sort of like let some micro schools exist and learn some lessons and then share it, but that doesn't tend to be the way that it works.
Got it. Brendan, any more questions?
Just as a follow-up, Mike, there was a question about, is there a central place where you track the legislation you're referring to that you could share with, well, there you go. edchoice.org has a tracker that will offer additional information. There was a question, thank you, Mike. There was a question about individually for your specific programs, where this is heading. What is your future vision? A lot has happened. You have made a lot of changes, the three of you yourselves, over the last few years. So there's a question about kind of your future vision for the work that you're leading. Iman, I'm going to call on you. You're going to kick us off. And then we'll go to Heather, and then we'll go to Ian.
Thank you. We have so many big dreams. The goal is we're opening our first brick and mortar, and the goal is to open 100 of these over the next 10 years across the world. That's really was the goal from the beginning. 3 years from now, hopefully we have our own like actual, right now we're kind of like in a retail spot where we hope to have like a one-room schoolhouse type model on like acres of land. We're in Florida, so that's not really realistic. But those are kind of the dreams, just to keep serving students all over the world, keep opening up alternative education models, hopefully get a lot of teachers and allow them the chance and support them in moving towards opening microschools. I really am frustrated with the fact that so many families call me and I can't service them because they live in Hollywood and I live in Coral Springs, and there's not one down there. So like I'm trying to like get parents, give them that input as well, and coaching teachers on opening schools.
And I'll take that and run with it. And there's like amazing educators in Hollywood who are like excited to open these schools like at the same time. So yeah, as of 30 seconds ago, our vision is to partner with Iman and expand like thousands of schools around the state and the world.
I am here for it, Ian.
I mean, it's really it's really to give educators a pathway and give families a pathway, and just make it as doable and fun and user friendly and great for kids as possible. So in the next year, we are launching 5 micro schools across South Florida, and we're looking to grow very quickly from there. And then we're also creating pathways for educators virtually to teach excellent programs and connecting those with kids. So looking to scale as quick as possible.
For me, you know, this year I had my micro school of 6 students, and I'm really excited next year I'm going to partner with another teacher who lives locally, and we're going to work together to take on additional students. So I think we'll grow to about 16 to 18 students. There's a ton of interest locally. I have another waiting list of 8 to 10 students. So I'm trying to just work with our district to maybe create a district micro school, and also with some community members to provide more choices for students. I feel really passionate about there just being options, and for families to be able to find that right fit, whether it be public school or a district micro school or homeschool or micro school. So I think my goals are to continue to do what I'm doing with my own micro school and advocate for that. And, you know, then I have that bigger dream of my schoolhouse in the woods, but for right now, we're taking baby steps.
I'm just wondering if you guys have any questions for each other.
I guess I'm a little bit curious about the micro schools. You know, I've heard people talk about micro schools in different parts of the state that are much bigger than what I think of as a micro school. So I'm curious on, you know, what size student of teacher to student ratio that you guys aim for in Florida.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Like,
I would say we think about it as like max 30, but a 1 to 10 ratio is where we're trying to land.
right. Yeah, for our lower, we're looking at 1 to 8. That would be the K through 2 group. And then for our upper, we're looking at max 1 to 11-ish. Very Montessori, kind of just adding to what the question that I saw. A lot of project-based learning, curriculum, kind of pulling from that, and the size of classrooms.
Thank you. That's actually very similar to kind of what I had in mind for appropriate numbers. Or, you know, I kind of wrestle with that idea of like, when do you become too big to be a micro school and you can't quite do the same thing?
The exciting part is that this, like, we're building this right now, so we're making it up as we go, and everyone on this call hopefully is joining us in that process. So yeah, I'd shout out to you guys, and I love ed choice. Like, I use them, I've been researching them regularly. So thank you, Mike, for all the work you guys are doing down there. It's super helpful.
I will happily claim all of my brilliant colleagues' work as my own right now. So you are very welcome, Ian.
If you email them, you may or may not have Mike be the one emailing you back. So it's actually not true. I'm just gonna, but he's great, and he might email you back. You never know.
Mike, do you have, as we start to wrap up here, do you, and I'll put your book on hybrid homeschools in the chat, Mike, because that's another piece of this as well. But do you, in the pandemic prognostication about, you know, where does this lead to? Is this a moment in time or not? There was an Associated Press story earlier this year about how enrollment, homeschool enrollment across a whole bunch of states had stayed awfully high, and families' interests seem to be sustaining even as schools reopened. And so just kind of as we look forward to kind of, as we start to wrap up this conversation, curious what you see coming down the pike.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you two. I'll give you a sort of an objective and a subjective observation. The objective observation is just the National Center for Education Statistics, NCS, the federal government's statistical agency for education, just published every year, puts out the condition of education in America. So they're kind of formal statistics. And that if you look at the homeschooling numbers from sort of pre-pandemic to now, according to NCES, they've basically doubled from about 3.3% to about 6.8%. So now there were times during the pandemic that the Census Bureau and others had taken that number up to like 12 or 15%. Seems like it's come back down. So it's weird, sort of the perspective that you look at it. It's either gone down, but gone down from still to a level twice of what it was before. So I think that that's definitely there. So that's the sort of objective. Like, clearly a lot of more people are interested in sort of outside of the system. The second thing is you mentioned I've done this work on hybrid homeschooling before. For the first time ever, just a couple of weeks ago in Kennesaw, Georgia, at Kennesaw State University, some of the folks there hosted the first conference for hybrid homeschoolers. It was on a Saturday in suburban Atlanta, and it was packed. There were like 150 people came from all over the country. It was one of the most exciting, like invigorating, wonderful places. You hear all this stuff like on the news where like people are at their throats, at each other's throats for things in education. These were people that came to hybrid homeschooling, at least, from like a whole bunch of different perspectives. You had like super religious people and non-religious people. You had very conservative people. You had very progressive people, whatever. And it was just like helping each other and supporting each other and excited for what they were doing. And I think you see this in the micro schooling space as well. A lot of these folks are saying like, yeah, I get like you're like a different religion than I am, whatever, but isn't this cool? Like that you got this micro school thing. So that subjective observation I've had makes me very excited for what's happening in the future. I think there's an opportunity for lots of folks who may think very differently about other things to actually come together on this particular thing and say, hey, look, like this is actually something exciting and positive and things that we can build together. So I'm super bullish on this. And then obviously I get this chance to meet the people who actually do it. And they're all super impressive and wonderful in places where I'd like want to send kids. So it just keeps reinforcing itself, and I'm super excited to see where it all goes.
Can you explain what you mean by a hybrid homeschool? I don't know if everybody's familiar with
they're
that
just
term.
just sort of schools where kids go to a kind of formal school environment for part of the week, usually like 2 or 3 days a week, and then they're schooled from home for 2 or 3 days a week. So some of them actually function kind of as micro schools. Some of them are actually quite small. Some of them are huge and have hundreds of students in them. But another one of these kind of outside of the norm types of schools.
Okay.
All right, so the clock says 2 o'clock here on the East Coast. Never punctual for anything, but we have a lot of people here, so let's be respectful of your time and let you go. But thank you so much for joining us. As we mentioned at the top, this call was recorded. It'll be on the 74's website. It'll be on VELA's website. If you have questions, you can reach out to hello@velaedfund.org, and we will make sure that they get to the right person. But again, thanks so much to our panelists. Thanks so much to Linda for moderating. And thanks so much for all of you for being here. I hope you have a terrific day.